This is Professor James Beverley, who we've all met before several times, whose fault this conference is.
Along with John.
Well, he came and brainwashed me into doing this. I can't remember why. And this is one of my dearest friends in the world, Christian Szurko, who is a theologian by training, but has been working counselling cult members for about 40 years or something. Like that, yeah. And we're going to have a little section here about religion. It'll be little because there's, it's like, is Scientology religion? No. Thank you very much.
Next.
And then we're going to, Chris Shelton is going to tell us some very interesting things about the Truth Rundown. So,
what does Dr. Beverley do?
Yeah, what do you do for a living, Dr. Beverley?
Well, it's been reported since November that I'm a spy for Scientology.
It's his main source of income.
So that would be one thing, but I'm not a spy. Raised in a Christian home, been a professor for 37 years at a Christian school, so I wrote on ex-Scientology message board, if I was a spy for Scientology, I would lose my job, lose my income, I would lose lose credibility. Okay, so there, I'm not a Scientology spy. I'm a professor at the largest seminary in Canada, and I'm an associate director with an institute for the study of religion in Texas. And I might as well tell you, I work with Gordon Melton. Even though he's a friend, I do not share his views on every topic. I'm not his slave. We argue all the time about topics. And I have a far more negative view of Scientology than he does, but he has an increasingly negative view over the last few years. But he's so sick of Scientology, doesn't want to do much about it. Okay, then, so that's it. Now, I wanted to show you my baby. We have my wife and I have like a daughter and a son, and then in terms of other kinds of children, I have 14 books. One just came out this week. On Islam and Jesus. This one is Nelson's Illustrated Guide to Religions. Now, the reason I'm telling you about it is because not only does the book weigh twice as what I weighed when I was born. I weighed 2 pounds. This book is 4 pounds. But I have a chapter on Scientology. This was the last chapter I wrote in the book. It's a short chapter because the publisher said, if you don't finish this book after 8 years of being late, we will cancel it. I wanted to add a whole bunch of stuff about Scientology, but they said, that's it, it's over. But I have a brief section here, and this will be a way to tell you about religion and Scientology. The battle over Scientology is so nasty that careful analysis is necessary to sort through false claims, wild rhetoric, and biased views. Then I said 5 things are clear. No pun intended. I now realize this was 6 years ago. I have a different view. So, in spite of what some critics argue, it's obvious that Scientology is a religion. I no longer think it's obvious. The reason I don't think it's obvious is because of all the stuff that most of us here now that know about, okay? So let me just stop there and I'll... Oh yeah, so there, back in 2009, I said it's a religion. But I say, in spite of what some critics argue, secondly, the fact that Scientology is a religion should not stop critique of its failings. And then critics of Scientology should have the liberty to exercise free speech. Okay, so I'm not too upset about that. But here's a way to think about it. Is Scientology a religion? I believe that when you study religion, and I've studied hundreds of groups, this book covers 24 families of religion. I believe once you do that, you could easily say Scientology is a religion. And here's a way to think about it. If you saw a new book at the airport when you fly home or the next time you're in a bookstore, and if you saw a book that said Encyclopedia of Religions, now think about this. Encyclopedia of Religions. Would you expect Scientology to be included? You probably would. You may not want it to be, but you probably would because you know that's the popular view. Now, the trouble with saying it's a religion is still generally viewed as a positive word. So that's why Scientology wants to be called a religion. And then, of course, with their case and others, they want it for tax reasons. I just wrote one of the operatives in OSA that I met at a conference at Baylor University, and I wrote her after and said, you know, I'm more and more disturbed about the evidence that Scientology uses religion as a cloak. And so I would like you to comment about that, and so on and so forth. I haven't got a reply yet. I wrote the email in November, followed it up with another email.
Communication lag.
Yes. So my view now is, if you say it's a religion, you better then start talking about criminality, illegality, et cetera, et cetera. And you better talk about the necessity for investigation of Scientology status in any country to deal with all the allegations and evidence of overwhelming immorality, et cetera. Now, one thing I said this to Nan the other day, maybe yesterday, I said, okay, one thing, and she knows this, religion can be a disgusting, wicked, unbelievable thing, but you still know it's religion. Example, I just wrote a book on Islam. I know the world authorities on the Islamic State. Is the Islamic State a religion? I think it is. I think it's a sick, disgusting, immoral, wicked religion. Okay? So what you need to do, whether you say Scientology or Group X is a religion, that doesn't solve the issue. You still have to think about morality, ethics, decency, public order, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's enough.
Do you have is Satanism in there?
Yes, it is.
So Satanism is a religion?
Excuse me, I need
hold it.
definition of religion, please.
Actually, I belong to the American Academy of Religion, the largest group of professors who study religion, 8,000 professors. That is still debated, but it has something to do sacred. It has to do with sacred. It has to do with religious texts. It has to do with people are looking for the supernatural, the transcendent. They do worship kind of things. They really believe it. They call it their religion. Now, I'm actually hired by the government of Ontario to investigate groups, to see what groups are, deserve the status versus ones I'm going to be doing a new case. We think maybe a guy who just started a church is doing it for a tax break. So, okay.
What a thought.
Yes.
I don't believe it.
Christian.
Yes. I was hoping that you would introduce the definition of religion, and that came about, but we didn't get to it because it's very difficult, if not impossible.
Oh, yeah, very good. Yeah.
But putting that aside, I'm still not convinced that Hubbard meant to found a religion, even though he said he wanted to do that to get rich. On the other hand, I think, and I need to ask you about this, and I missed the chance before, I think it was somewhere like the history of man, as far back as that he said that what he was doing was a way of sweeping aside things like politics and religion, and he didn't want people. So I'm really not sure if he ever meant it to be.
He criticizes religion and says religion is simply a way of tricking people into giving you money.
Yes.
and controlling them.
And then you also have
And then he founded one.
And then you also have this idea that all religions are an implant. Now, calling yourself, I know amongst a lot of people who criticize Scientology, we have this expression, Operation Foot Bullet, for when you, well, never mind, it's just Scientology, standard operating procedure. But if you say that all religions are an implant, and we are an implant, I would like to call that Operation Saw the Branch that you're sitting on off. Because once you say that all religions are an implant and we're one, what are you really saying about yourself? So I'm really not sure that I'm comfortable calling them a religion, whatever religion is. And then you have the question that, as we heard this morning from John and the others, it's Charles Manson's religion. So that takes you into yet another direction.
And the son of Sam as well.
And the son of Sam. Oh, mustn't forget the son of Sam. The other point that I made, that I wanted to remind myself, was that sometimes you think of religion as something that's intentionally spiritual or intentionally something. Star Wars movies never intended to create a religion. And yet, as we heard this morning, there are more people who profess to be Jedi Knights than there are in England, at least, and I think in Australia as well, than there are people who profess to be Scientologists. So yet another criterion for deciding is it a religion or not. It doesn't mean to be spiritual or transcendent or supernatural or whatever you're calling it. Does it matter? My last thought about it is that whether it's a religion or not, and I tend to say no, because it doesn't want to be a religion, it wants a religious tax break. And there's a difference to me between we want a religion and we want a religious tax break, because in a real religion, you have a social element in which people sincerely come together to jointly celebrate whatever their religion is and to benefit the rest of mankind with their religion. Well, one thing that's obvious to me in observing Scientology is that they destroy the capacity for real relationships wherever they can. So the social element is torn apart. So there again, I would say calling it a religion.
What would you say there to
difficult?
Think of your average Scientologist, not the upper management. And you know, Chris can answer this when he comes up later. They would say, we do X, Y, Z in the world. We go to Nepal to help. So there's a social betterment there.
Are they going to help or are they going to advertise?
Churches are seen as reform groups, so we must act as a reform group.
Yes. It's an advertising scam, in my view. Okay. In my view.
Well,
it's an advertising scam. And to me, that again means it's not a religion because of the selflessness that we normally think of in
right.
kind of religious
One of the things that
sense.
happened to me just in the last 2 days, this is only the second day of our conference. Yesterday was heaven, but it was eternal too. Wasn't it a long day? Okay, so here's what happened to me, just based on, and today, hearing people's stories. And then I had a pretty long talk with someone here I don't want to name, but one of the big things that is clear to me now is the ways that there's such hardcore deception, dishonesty, lies, and main intent to make money is so overwhelming that I think that's the biggest thing that needs to be said. It's just staggering. So the person who talked to me, I don't want to say who it is, but other people I know who are very public figures, like Jeffrey Augustine. I've been in Jeffrey and Karen's home several times, and the stuff he's told me just blows my mind. I mean, it's amazing what he's doing on the money trail and all the evidence that this looks like an enterprise to make money. And then also the power thing. Okay.
Returning to what I was saying there, the destruction of relationships, which is so deliberate because relationships are one of the ways that you become enabled to reconsider your commitment to the group. If you and your wife have a closer relationship than either of you with Scientology, it means that you can talk confidently to one another about your doubts. How many people have said, I wanted to leave a lot sooner, but I was afraid that if I said anything to my spouse, they'd knowledge report me.
Vaughan and Stacey Young told me that for 7 years they both had doubts and wanted to leave and didn't dare tell each other.
Exactly.
Right. I had lunch with Mike Rinder 3 years ago, and I just had lunch with him at the end of April, and he really likes our conference, wished us well, but he had a long pre-planned holiday with his wife. Anyway, Mike told me, first time I was with him at lunch, I said, okay, you wake up in the middle of the night because you've been having doubts about Scientology, and you wake your wife up and say, I'm not sure about Scientology, Miscavige, etc. I said, does she have to get up and write a knowledge report right then, or can she wait till the morning? He said, she could wait till the morning, I guess, but of course that would be so traumatic she wouldn't get back to sleep, right? And neither would he or anybody in the parallel situation. So what a disaster that is.
The last thing that I do want to say is that I'm inclined to say they're not a religion because the religion angle, as Hubbard puts it, is play acting. There's no sincerity there. It's, as you said, all about the money. But I do object to them using the word church.
Yeah, me too.
Ecclesia was a term for the city-state to bring its people together to have democratic decision-making about their fate. There's no democracy in Scientology. It's also the term for the assembly of people, particularly who are Christians. It's not used to describe non-Christian religion until Hubbard comes along.
Church of American Science, which will convert Christians to Scientology, was, I think, the first use. When I complained to Janet Reitman that she kept saying, the church, the church, the church, and I say, look, it's a cult. Call it an organization, call it Scientology, but it is not a church. Look the word up. She wanted to argue with me that it's a religion. And I said, why is it a religion? She said, because the IRS says so. And it's like, what are we talking about now?
By the way, one thing I'll mention there, because you used the word cult, for Christians, no, even this is done all over the case. Here's one way to make religion simple. You save the word religion for a religion like Buddhism or Christianity or Islam, and here's why. They've been around a long time and they're big. Same for, Baha'i or...
Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrianism.
Jains.
Okay, so there. Then you have the word cult for groups like the Unification Church, Scientology, etc. That makes it simple. So you can do that. That's one way. So when I first started studying this stuff in 1978, I was told to teach a course about cults. And it was just assumed it would be the small groups that everybody thinks are weird. Then I soon realized it's not that simple, because there is such weird stuff in some religions. For example, I've done a lot of work on Tibetan Buddhism, and I've had a private interview with the Dalai Lama. The esoteric stuff in Tibetan Buddhism is out of this world. So
some of the Tantra is extraordinary.
Yes, tantric stuff.
I mean, there's a scandal around Naropa, and some of the people teaching, they're catching AIDS from their students.
Right.
Which is not really a religious practice. It's also true that Scientology, Hugh Urban in his analysis finally gets to it, having called the book Scientology a new religious movement. He's not really sure that it is religious. And he basically says it's something that reshaped itself to fit the definitions within countries. So when Lord Denning ruled, I think in 1968, on whether Scientology was a religion, it was very simple. It's not a religion because it has no worship. But then you go, well, technically Buddhism has no worship.
Right.
So it's a fairly loose and flexible term. Sasha wants to say something. Do we have a handheld?
Could I leave you with one thought? I don't believe Scientology, at the end of the day, is a religion, but it is a criminal organization, as we have heard for the last 2 days and will continue to hear, and it is a very good way of destroying people's lives and their families and their social connections and doing serious damage to our society. And I think those are the things that are our real takeaway. But please, they're not a church.
No,
Scientology Inc.
It's a few things because they come up as you discussed. We also use a definition of religion as a group that produces culture.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why, whatever we think about Tibetan Buddhism or Tantrism, no matter how much, it's against my taste, something, but it does produce culture, and it's even civilization. Cults, they don't produce culture. And from sociological point of view, I think, it could be used. Secondly, about the church, with my students, several years ago, I performed with them a very simple task, like homework. I would, give them a phone number of the Church of Scientology and made them to make a phone call. And they would call there and say, is it the Church of Scientology? And I said, yes, it is. Of course, it is the Church of Scientology. So when is your next service? And they would be total silence. They say, well, you could come for courses, but, well, is it a school of Scientology? No, it's a Church of Scientology. So when is your next service? And then it would go on forever. So
but after Lord Denning made his ruling, at St. Hill, they determined that they would have a Sunday service every week. And when I was there, which was from 1975 to 77, and then from 80 to 83, that service was attended every week by one person who was the chaplain giving it.
Yeah.
You know, so no, it is a pretense at religion. But I will take the sociological perspective, which is it's not a matter of whether the guy who founded it was a con artist and whether it's a complete sham. It's a matter of whether the believers believe. And in that sense, they make of it a religion. But as Christian says, and I can kind of see that, it doesn't. I must say, it doesn't bother me at all because Satanism is a religion, you know, and it does. It's not a positive term. But as Christian says, it most certainly isn't a church.
Yeah.
By the way, let me tell you how weird religion is here. I'm personal friends with the head of the Church of Satan. Okay,
He's his best friend.
His name's Peter Gilmore. I know him because he helped me on the chapter. He just did some detail, and then to thank him, I met him in New York City and gave him a copy of my book, so we become friends. So not only am I a spy for Scientology, I'm a friend with the head of the Church of Satan. So listen to this. I would rather that somebody got oriented to Peter Gilmore's type of faith than Scientology. And I'll say that on tape publicly.
Yeah.
Why? Peter believes in democracy and human rights, okay? And I don't think the record from Scientology is very good.
Yeah. And then finally, I wanted to finish that Russian Ministry of Justice had denied religious status of Scientology on a simple reason, because Scientology has a trademark over its terms, and religion, by definition, couldn't have trademarks.
Good
it was
point.
trade and religion, so...
It's a business.
By the way, see, if the Islamic State said that they were a religion and applied to the IRS,
They get tax exemption, you know, inevitably.
No. See, that's where it's power and politics and the IRS isn't going to give the Islamic State. They might even have a meeting and say, well, it is a religion, but we'll keep that to ourselves. Because it's obvious. Even if it's a religion, the world doesn't care. They're killers.
In England, we do have this differentiation. Scientology is recognized by law as a religion. It does not have charitable status because it's not recognized as being beneficial.
That's right. It's not beneficial.
I've noticed that, Tori.
It's an organization, and it's the key thing. I've gone back and forth and around on this because it's a religion. I started calling it a cult, and people are like, well, is it really a cult? And then I thought, you know what? It doesn't matter. It's a business. You have to pay for every single level. I've paid, just for the top levels, $200,000, probably $1 million to get to where I am. In Scientology, and you have to pay it. It's not a donation. They call it a donation, but if you guys can name any other religion where there's a price tag on every single level that someone does, then I'm willing to listen. But otherwise, that's the key breaking point.
There's a Hubbard issue called What Your Donations Buy, and what most members don't know is when it was originally issued, it was called What Your Fees Buy.
Right. Exactly.
I think we're going to have to move on so that Chris Shelton can come up here and amaze us with his story. So thank you very much. This gentleman has impressed me tremendously because the reason that I took my life in my hands again and came back to talk, having been steamrolled into bankruptcy and ruination, back in the 90s, was because I realized that most Scientologists do not recover, ever. It's a lifelong disease. And only very occasionally do you find somebody who has come out and started to think critically and go, hang on a minute, this is crazy. And they manage to sort of excavate themselves from this. And this gentleman, for my money, he's done this. He's an incredible man, and he didn't come to me for any help, you know. So this is Chris Shelton. Please give him a big hand.
Hi. Okay, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. I want to make sure this projects well and all that. We got this thing on. Okay, good. So on the heels of is Scientology religion? I definitely don't think that it is. I thought I would talk about, let's see, religion, the worst part of religion, the mind control aspect of it. And in Scientology, I guess this would be the equivalent of the Spanish Inquisition. So what I want to talk about, exactly. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. So basically, there's a thing in Scientology that's called security checking. This has also been called integrity processing or confessionals. And those terms are all, for the same process, which is using an e-meter, which is that electronic lie detector, in order to get a person to confess their sins, to tell the auditor what they've done wrong, or that they feel is wrong, or what the church is going to enforce on them is wrong, right? Because you can come into Scientology with a certain mindset or a certain viewpoint about what is right and wrong, and over the course of time in Scientology, that will morph and change into what the church thinks is right and wrong, all in the direction of getting more and more money from you. That's really what it's all about in the end. And mind control is important in Scientology because they talk about in the Going Clear documentary. I thought one of the most insightful statements made in that documentary was that the whole point of Scientology is it's Hubbard's alter ego, and the whole point of it is to get you thinking like and being L. Ron Hubbard. And so they're going to have to control your thinking and control what you're doing and your mental processes in order to get you there. And I think that security checking, which started to be developed at 1959, 1960, was the first, for my money, the first overt attempts at mind control, at actually changing people's minds and getting them under control. It can definitely be argued, and there's certainly a case to be made, that earlier forms of auditing mess with your head, are a form of hypnosis, are a form of brainwashing, but I think security checking was the first overt attempt at that. Let's see here. So security checking in general is, like I said, that's the auditor, and the pre-clear, the person who's receiving the security checking, is basically asked interrogatory type questions. Have you ever robbed a bank? Have you ever beaten your wife? Have you ever, questions that are going to elicit sinful actions, right? And that was the first thing. And then they started writing the answers down and putting them in folders. And I came to find out, actually, I think Hannah mentioned yesterday, they were in separate folders to start with, and they started getting put in the same folders. And that information is now used, against people if they leave the church to get them to be quiet. But what's not talked about a lot is a pretty advanced form of security checking, which is called the Truth Rundown. And there was a news article in the St. Petersburg Times called the Truth Rundown, and it was a whole expose on Scientology. But I don't think a lot of people got the joke that the Truth Rundown is the name of an action that's done in Scientology, and it's mostly done it's only done by the Sea Organization, and it's mostly only done on Sea Organization members. So it's a very secretive action. Like most public Scientologists have never heard of the Truth Rundown. It's not done on public in general. In the 27 years that I was in, I heard of one public person receiving it. And the stated reason for it is to handle black PR on Scientology. If a person is found to be spreading black PR, rumors, things that are derogatory about, statements that are derogatory about Scientology, or especially L. Ron Hubbard, or especially David Miscavige, you become a target for the Truth Rundown. And normally a public person is just dealt with security checking and with lots and lots of amends, right? Meaning you're going to be paying for the privilege of having said nasty things about David Miscavige, right? But in these extreme examples where a person is actually found to have been engaged in some kind of campaign, they become a candidate for this truth rundown. Almost everybody, when I did the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, and that was in 2004, I went and did that. Just about everybody who landed on the RPF received the truth rundown. I received it, I audited it on my twin, and I audited it on somebody else who was leaving the Sea Org. We had to do this truth rundown on him before he would go, just to make sure that he wasn't going to go out there and spread a bunch of black PR about Scientology and about L. Ron Hubbard. Does that make sense? So far, everybody tracking? Okay, good. Just want to make sure I'm not throwing anything out there that's... okay, so the truth rundown, you know, people talk about the RPF being like a Maoist reconditioning camp. And the truth rundown is a key part of that, right? Which is why it's so crucial to the RPF. You have all the physical work, and you have the running around, and you have this culture in the RPF of nobody really trusts anybody else there, and you know, in Scientology there's this idea of reporting on each other. I cannot even begin to describe to you the extreme that is taken to in the RPF. I mean, you can't sneeze, and I do mean literally sneeze, without somebody reporting it, right? There was a guy who you work with another person, you're twinned up, and this person had supposedly finished a section of the RPF where they had addressed all the things wrong with them personally. You know, you address, across all 8 of these areas of your life, and the first part is yourself. And so this person had received security checking on themselves, and then one day came to muster in the morning and they hadn't shaved. And so that person's twin received like 3 knowledge reports from other people on the RPF about how his twin clearly could not have been done with the first part of that security checking because he hadn't shaved that morning. And so he was put right back onto it and had to do the whole thing all over again. This is kind of how micromanaged and under a microscope you are when you're on the RPF. So, as far as this truth rundown goes, this thing is pretty interesting, and let me just run down for you how it works and then what its effects are, so that if you've ever wondered, especially when you get close to Miscavige and you get guys up at the international level where you wonder, how do these guys put up with this? Why do they keep doing this? Why do they put up with this kind of abuse? This might help answer that question. The first thing that's done, it's an action that's done where you are going to be put on a meter and you are going to be asked these interrogating questions, but first they go through your files and they, line by line, and it takes days to do this, especially if a guy has lots and lots of files, and by the time you've landed on the RPF, you usually have a lot of files. You go through and you find every line that you could possibly have ever said that could be interpreted to be a black PR or derogatory statement about Scientology or Scientology leaders or executives or L. Ron Hubbard or something like that. So they got to cull all these lines. Then, once you've got these things and you got a few pages or sheets of this, you sat down and let's say that your line is staff members never get paid in organizations, right? That could be your black PR line. Do you see how that could be a black PR line? You run around telling people, yeah, you don't want to join staff never get paid. Oh, you can't say that, that's black PR, right? You'll be discouraging people from joining staff if you tell them that, so you don't want to be saying that. Now, you might, that might be true, and it does happen to be true, but in the Scientology bubble world, that's black PR, right? Or David Miscavige beats his staff. That would be absolutely black PR within the Scientology bubble world. You would not ever say that about David Miscavige in the Scientology world. If you did, you'd be getting this, okay? That kind of black PR. So what happens is let's say this line is staff never get paid. So what you're asked is, well, when did you observe that to be the case? And you go, oh, well, I was on staff for 8 years and there were plenty of times I didn't get paid. Okay, well, let's get a specific time. Yeah, okay, good. May, 2005, I didn't get paid. Great. Was there Let's get it down now. Was an earlier time you observed that to be the case, until you find the first time that the guy can say, yeah, I didn't get paid, or I observed staff didn't get paid at my org in Santa Barbara in 1999, May 1999. And go, okay, good, we got that time. Now, you're on the meter, you're holding those cans, and the question comes, okay, you got that time in mind when you observe that? Mm-hmm, good. Here's the question. Just before that, what overt did you commit? Okay? So by overt is meant what harmful action or transgression did you carry out? What did you do wrong, in other words, right? And the meter is used, and they're going to ask you this question over and over on the meter until they get it to respond. On the question just before that, what overt did you commit? Has anything been suppressed? Invalidated? They ask you all these questions on the meter until they finally get that thing to react. And then they go, well, okay, what was that? Right? And it gets tracked down. What was that overt you committed? What was that thing you did? And you have to find out. Now, your job is not to look any longer at the fact that you weren't getting paid as a staff member. Now your job is to find what you did wrong just before you observe that to be the case. Okay? The idea, and this is where it gets crazy. The idea is that you observed that incorrectly and have actually deluded yourself because of your own transgressions, because of what you did wrong. You're observing that wrong, you're making that up and deluding yourself, and now you're spreading it around to other people because of how evil you are. And it actually gets even a little bit worse than that, but you're following with the theory of this, right? So, also, the other thing about this is when you're asked for this overt, you have to find not just, okay, yeah, I was at the org and the phone was ringing and I knew it was probably, somebody who was calling to find get a service, and I didn't pick up the phone. No, it can't be something petty. You have to find a serious overt. That's the way it's described, as serious overt, right? And something along the line of the black PR that you're spreading. It has to be an overt on that subject. So you could offer up 3 or 4 different things, and if the auditors, the person who's sec-checking you says, yeah, no, that's not serious enough. I want the serious overt. I want to know what you did that was really not okay. So you might have to go around and round on this a few times. And I did a couple times on that. What do you mean that overt's not good enough? No, I want the serious one, right? Otherwise, the overt won't be accepted. And the idea is that your overt, your transgression, is something that you're holding in place to justify the black PR. So in the case of the staff not getting paid, you have to dig up some overt maybe where you stole the staff money, right? Because now the staff aren't getting paid because of what you did. Has to be something like that, right? It has to be right on the line of that black PR. And so you finally cough something up, and this is where the delusory part comes up, because you might have to make up an answer in order to get through this thing. You might even believe it yourself. Anyway, regardless, you get that, you go back earlier until you get the earliest time, earliest kind of overt of that kind. And without getting too technical, because there's a lot to know about this, the other thing about this is that this kind of security checking is done what's called FPRD style, okay, which is false purpose rundown. In other words, they're not just looking for your transgression, but they're actually going to dig down until they get the evil purpose that exists within you that prompted you to commit that overt. So it's still not enough that you've now told them what the transgression is, but they're going to take it further and go, once they get to the earliest time, they're going to ask you, was there an evil purpose or destructive intention that prompted you to commit that overt? And you have to now dream up the evil purpose, to destroy mankind. That was the purpose that I've been carrying around with me all these eons that prompted me to commit that overt to destroy all happy people. I mean, you could do whatever the purpose could be, and believe me, you do the RPF, you're going to come up with hundreds of these things. And so you get this whole thing, and you go through this over and over on every one of these lines of black PR that they found in your files that you have potentially spread, until you are in a state of mind where you now believe, after having gone through this procedure, that none of those black PR lines, none of those things that happened that got you thinking, like staff don't get paid, that you just made all that up because of what you did. It's all back to you. Do you see how that works? So you're literally told that chairman of the board, for example, if you were at Int Management and maybe one day he got kind of pissed and he hit you, that is now something delusory. That didn't happen. What happened was you actually hit your junior, and because of your evil purposes. You see what I'm saying? And that is done on every single one of these Sea Org members. So what you get here is a literal rewrite of a person's memories, so that they come out the other end of this thing thinking that what they were black PRing was actually good and they were actually bad. And I don't know, I can't particularly think that, I can't think of a better way of reconditioning somebody than doing that to them. And that's how it's done in Scientology. And I personally think that it's far more effective than beating on somebody, because you're getting the guy himself to rewrite his own memories. What's that? Exactly. It's all, see, a lot of Scientology, and this doesn't get, I don't know, this gets talked about, but it's all about getting your attention inward and on yourself and on what's going on in your head. And it's, I've called it the me religion, right? Because it's very egotistical. It's very, it's very much about, what's the word? Well, it's very much about, the individual, right? Narcissistic. Yeah, narcissism, right? There's a lot of narcissism in Scientology. It's all about me, my gains, my reality, my think, right? But there's also this other aspect to it where it's all your responsibility. It's all on you, and this is a problem certainly was a problem for me coming out of Scientology. And part of the recovery process was really having to come to grips with the fact that things happen in the world that have absolutely nothing to do with me, and that there's stuff that goes down that I didn't have any responsibility for at all. And just because random circumstances occurred to cause a traffic accident, I'll tell you one of the last things to leave my headspace of Scientology stuff was the whole PTS. If I get sick, it's because I am at the effect of some suppressive person, or I've done something wrong, in other words, to somebody, and now I'm pulling it in on me, and that's why I'm sick. Oh my God, it took me over a year to get over that. That was rough, because it's just so, slammed into you, kind of like this sort of thing. So anyway, this TRD, this Truth Rundown, is a well-kept secret. The issues on it, there's only 3 issues from Hubbard that describe it and how to do it. None of them have ever leaked out of Scientology that I've been able to find. And like I said, most public Scientologists wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about if you talked about the Truth Rundown. So, yes?
For instance, when Leah
I'd just like to say that what's happening is called false memory syndrome. And there's a terrible problem with it, which is that if you induce false memories in somebody, their ability to remember will become inefficient. And they will start to actually imagine things and move them over into memory. It's a form of deep psychological abuse.
Yes.
So, for instance, when Leah Remini at the Tom Cruise wedding uttered those words, "Where's Shelley?"
Yep.
Because she wasn't a Sea Org member, she was just subjected to ordinary sec checking and lower conditions, not the truth rundown?
Well, here's the thing. I know for absolute certain that one public received it in Los Angeles. I suspect that Leah Remini probably received the truth rundown at Flag because of that, because of who she was attacking, what she was saying. She would definitely have been a candidate for it, but I only suspect that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes, Chris.
Yes.
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
Thank you so much for talking about this subject. It's one of the key points of manipulation in Scientology, presenting the person with two opposing ideas, two contradictory ideas.
Yes.
That they just freeze the mind, because they can't think with those ideas. They're not permitted to think with them, and they're not permitted to sort them out. So that freezes the mind, and that brings about the robotic obedience that Scientologists keep exhibiting for years and years. Okay, and thank you. And it is one of the things in Scientology that brought on my years and years and years of headaches. Even listening to you speak here about the manipulation, how you can take one idea and make a person believe that it is actually something completely different, has brought on a headache. And that's my verification that that's exactly where those headaches come from. So thank you very much. It's a very, very key part of the Scientology manipulation.
Okay, cool.
Just to comment
sorry
on
about
that.
I didn't mean to do that.
It's called a double bind,
Yeah.
and it runs all the way through Scientology. That almost everything is contradicted, so that you become incapable of thinking your way through it. The amazing thing to me is that in 9 years membership, I never once noticed this. Save for him saying when somebody asks for a refund, you always give it. When somebody asks for a refund, you never give it. I noticed those sorts of things. But if you read Dianetics, you find that from one page to the other, he says hypnosis is never used in Dianetics. Hypnosis was used as a basic tool in Dianetics, this kind of thing.
Yeah,
Where are we
exactly.
going?
Just one other real quick point on that point, which I think is manifest in Scientology. People also wonder, why don't they look at the internet? Why don't they ever go and look at anything anti-Scientology or something that might be critical of Scientology? And it's because pretty early on in Scientology, you are convinced, even if you don't get this whole truth rundown activity, that the only reason somebody is critical, the word critical in Scientology is a bad word. If you are critical, that means you're finding criticism or finding fault with something, and that only means one thing in Scientology, that you have done something wrong or bad that's causing you to feel that way, to feel that criticism. And that's introduced as a concept pretty early. So you get a bunch of people convinced of that. They think anybody critical is just speaking out of their own overts, their own transgressions, and so they don't want to listen to them. So,
Chris?
Yes.
I want to thank you for speaking so succinctly about this truth rundown. I was the original auditor that piloted the truth rundown. I was the person that L. Ron sent the instructions to and executed them and sent him the results back, and thus it came out as a Scientology thing to do. But what you described is not what L. Ron created. There was never a situation in that truth rundown thing that we went through where if a person told you something that they did that they considered to be an overt, that it was never accepted. As a matter of fact, that is so against everything that auditing is about that I had learned. When L. Ron was alive, there's an auditor code. These are things you never do. So what you learned there comes straight from Miscavige.
That's what I suspected.
That is him putting on his own little spin on it to make. It's kind of like You take a pile of crap and turn it into shit. It's already bad, and you just make it worse.
That's right. That's exactly right.
We've got a breaking news from Tony.
And make
Chris,
and
I
make
just-
no mistake, because that was part of the procedure when I was doing it, and I definitely get that it was not part of it when it was first being done. But that was, the supervisor would stand there the first few times the procedure was done to make sure that it was a serious overt that was being gotten and that it was along the lines of the black PR, and that had to be part of it. So, yes.
I have worked with a lot of people helping them get out or heard their stories afterwards who had lost their mind. Many people have, I'm sorry, they fall down that slippery slope and this is what happens.
Yeah.
The one thing that I found that was consistent with each one of them was FBRD style auditing.
Yes.
Every single one that I talked to. And now you just made it so much clearer as to why these people would end up so damaged.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that FPRD is interesting stuff because it really does focus your attention inward, not just while you're receiving the auditing, but from there on out in life. Every time you're doing something, you're trained into a thought pattern of looking inward to find what it is that's motivating your behavior, and most specifically, what evil purpose inside of yourself is motivating your behavior. And it's an extremely introverting procedure that mentally gets you spinning all the time on that. So it totally makes sense. Okay, yep.
Okay, we're going to have to call it quits. How about this? For the sake of the film, Chris, could you just tell people who you are? I mean,
Sure.
in relation to Scientology?
Okay, my name is Chris Shelton. I was a 27-year active in Scientology. I was a staff member for 25 of those years, actually staff for 8 years, Sea Org for 17, and I got out in December 2012, and I'm now, I basically self-identify as a critical thinker, and and Scientology critic.
So we hope the critical thinker part isn't a false memory.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I have proof. I have videos.
Okay. Okay, we're going to end, folks, with Tony has an announcement, and then we'll see at 6:30 Q&A, people that were on earlier.
No, we have other people on this evening.
Oh, we have other new people. Sorry.
Chrisman is on this.
Oh, Tori. I've heard of Tori.
Jesse's coming back.
Jesse, yeah. Yeah, Jesse has colorful language.
Good.
Okay, Tony.
I just have a little bit of breaking news. I made a phone call sitting back there to confirm this story is true. Mary Jo Alberger, former wife to convicted Ponzi schemer Reed Slatkin, confirmed to us this afternoon that her former husband died Saturday at about 3 p.m. of a massive heart attack. He was 66. He was alone and he made it to the hospital. He seemed to know he was having a heart attack and he collapsed and fell dead, Alberger told us in a telephone call today. In 2003, Slatkin pled guilty to mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. At the time, he was accused of operating one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history until it was eclipsed by the fraud perpetrated by Bernie Madoff. Slatkin had raised some $593 million in assets from investors before he was shut down by the Securities and Exchange Commission in May 2001 and was then raided by the FBI. Much of that money Slatkin raised from his fellow Scientologists, and he siphoned millions for the Church of Scientology itself. In July 2013, Slatkin was released from a halfway house and has been living in the Los Angeles area. He had a girlfriend. She was out of town when he died, Alberger tells us. The girlfriend then contacted the two sons that Alberger and Slatkin had together, and they in turn notified her. I'm just very sad because he had such a tragic life. His life was tragic from the time he was 16, and he discovered his father had committed suicide in the garage, she says. So I felt a compassion for him. Slatkin was born January 22nd, 1949, and grew up in Detroit. Alberger says that after his father's suicide, Slatkin was visited by his uncle, who ran a Scientology mission in the area. His uncle came to the rescue and audited everybody. Alberger met Slatkin in Los Angeles in Scientology, and they were married for 27 years until 2003. They split up while he was incarcerated. We asked Alberger if she's still involved with Scientology. She said she wasn't. I can't afford it, she said. But she is not critical of the movement. I don't want to become part of that war. As for Slatkin, she had not heard from him since his release from prison. Despite what he did, people are very saddened, and we're getting a lot of condolence messages. It's just very tragic. Attorney Scott Paludik, who was also a webmaster to the Underground Bunker, spent years watching the Slatkin case develop. I have no direct experience with Reed other than helping amass the documentary record of his Ponzi scheme, but I did speak with a lot of people who were taken in and watched their money disappear, Paludik tells us. Reed was quite the elaborate grifter by all accounts. There was always a question as to Scientology's involvement, but I think the record eventually showed that Reed was a victim and true believer himself, which is small consolation to his supposed customers who saw millions disappear inside Reed's gradually evaporating postulate. One of his kids reached out to me a few years ago and was remarkably civil, given how the website portrayed his father. Anyway, I wish the family the best, and I'm sorry Reed never reached out and spoke to me.